There's a character in a comic strip called Hunter, named Hunter. He's 4.5 years old, and he walks into the room and he sees Julian playing the violin, and he says to Julian, "What are you doing?" And Julian says, "I'm playing variations on a theme by Bach." And then Sally walks into the room, and little Julian says to Sally, "Tiger's playing violations on a theme by Bach." I love that because, we all are here to play a variation of the great theme of life, of the great theme of love and compassion and so many of those other divine attributes. We are here as a variation of that great theme. But a lot of times we have a sour note. We hit a wrong note, and we're hearing or seeing or experiencing more of a violation of that great theme of life. That is not what life is to be joyful and peaceful and harmonious. But there's so much more to it in our humanity. We have to let go of those concepts and beliefs that hold us to that violation of the great theme. Let it all go. Give expression to those qualities that we want to see in the world. And we can do this because we are divine. We are divine beings. We're continuing week 2 of our 5-week series on the 5 principles. And we're seeing how unity teachings line up with what's going on in the world today. We're using the book, The 5 Principles, by Unity minister Ellen Davenport. It's a great little book. You can get it on Amazon. She says this, the second principle: human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. Their very essence is of God, and therefore they are also inherently good. Do you believe that? That we are inherently good? That each of us is the Christ? It can be really hard to say that. I am the Christ. I am Christ. But that is our teaching in unity, that we are Christ. And Christ in unity is defined as the pattern for potential perfection. The pattern for potential perfection. That we're all created with that same pattern. But many of us grew up thinking differently. I shared a story on my very first talk here at Columbine over 6 years ago about a time in 418 AD when there was a great debate going on. There had been for years going on between Pelagius and Augustine. I'm sure many of you have heard of Augustine, but I bet not too many of you have heard of Pelagius. Pelagius believed that people were inherently good and we had free will and we could choose, and sometimes we choose to not behave in the best ways. Augustine believed that because of the fall of Adam, people were inherently bad, inherently evil, and we needed to be controlled. Guess who won that debate in 418? The one we've heard of or know of, the name so familiar, Augustine. And he won that debate because he sent 80 huge, beautiful stallions to the imperial guard. Bribery. Goes back a long way. But in unity, we align much more with Pelagius, that we are inherently good, that we were not born with original sin. Original sin is a man-made concept made to control us. We were born in original blessing, born inherently good. It says in the very first book of the Bible, in the Hebrew Scriptures, God saw everything that he made, and indeed it was good. It was very good. And that means not just we are very good, but everyone is very good. It doesn't say in the Bible what color skin the people were when God created them. It doesn't say that. Each of us is worthy. Each of us are very good. We don't always see it that way. Last week we talked about one presence and one power, the first unity principle that there is only one presence and one power, and we are unique expressions of that one presence and one power. That's where the concept of oneness comes, that we are all connected, that we're all part of this oneness. Now, it's really easy to misunderstand oneness and think oneness means sameness. It doesn't. We are all unique expressions, individualized expressions of the one. And so it might be easier or make more sense to us if we use the word wholeness instead of oneness, that we are all part of the whole, that we are all a piece of the puzzle. And without our piece, it's not whole. It needs us. Life needs us. We are here as part of the whole. And that means all of us, no matter what we look like, what we've done, we are part of this wholeness, this oneness. We need to know that we are worthy and that each of us are worthy. I read somewhere this week that our worship service should be called a worthship service. Sounds like I'm lisping. Worthship service, where we come to know our own worth, where we come to know our own value. You know, Jesus was not white. Jesus was born Middle Eastern. He probably had brown skin. But he's the greatest influence that we've had in thousands of years. Whether you follow him or we follow in unity, we follow the teachings of Jesus. Whether you align with that or not, he's had a great influence on who we are as a people. Ellen Davenport says this on Richard Rohr says this, getting my quotes mixed up. Richard Rohr this week had a whole series on white privilege. There is no issue of more or less in the eyes of an infinite God. If God operates as me, God operates as thee too. And the playing field is utterly leveled forever. But is it leveled in our minds? Is it truly leveled in our minds? Do we see that each of us is divine? That each of us is worthy and valued? This week, I called a dear friend of mine and wanted to get some feedback. Last week, I was extremely uncomfortable talking about racism and privilege. And I asked her to give me some honest feedback. And she did, and it was wonderful. And I said, and I'm embarrassed to share this with you, but I think it's important for us to realize where we are, where I am as a white woman. I said, well, I shared it and it was uncomfortable and now I can move on. And she very kindly said to me, that's privilege. This isn't a topic that we can just speak about one time and move on. That is privilege when you have the option to not continue to give voice to the injustice, to not continue to give voice to people of color and value them. I was very humbled in that moment and realized that she was absolutely right. We have the option as white people to ignore it, to not say anything, to just move on, go about our lives. When the Black people in our society can't do that. It's very humbling. And I understand as a result of that, that I need to clean up some stuff in my own consciousness. That each of us need to clean up what is in our consciousness when it comes to racism. This is not a conversation to be had one time. And I'm reading a book now called White Fragility, which is why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. It's written by a white person for a white audience to help us understand, to help us come to terms with where we are. I need to understand what I need to clean up so that I can act from my best self. Last night, Kevin and I watched a movie called Just Mercy, and I would highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. It's actually free to rent right now on Amazon. And it's a story written, it's based on a true story, based on a book that Bryan Stevenson wrote. If you recall, last week I talked about Bryan Stevenson, and he's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, which started this memorial museum a couple years ago. And Bryan Stevenson's an attorney who moved down to Alabama in order to help the poor and the Black and those who are discriminated against and those on death row. And it's an incredible story about his first few years in that role down in Alabama and how he helps a man named Walter McMillan. I'm not going to say any more about the story because I don't want to give anything away. It's an incredible story. And so important for us to educate ourselves we will never know, most of us who are white viewing this talk will never know what it's like to be a person of color. We can't possibly be in their shoes, but we can try. We can learn. We can do what is ours to do, what we feel called to do to help bring our country, our world, to a better place of harmony and peace for everyone. Bryan Stevenson says, each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. We don't want to be judged on that worst thing that we've done. We want to be valued for the divine beings that we are. Maybe there's someone in your circle of awareness who's done something that is the worst thing, and you can't get past that to see the Christ. Can you see the Christ in that person? This is ours to clean up in our consciousness. It starts there, in our own minds. This week, our granddaughter Reagan FaceTimed me. She's 6, and she said, "Susu, I want to show you something. You want to see?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I want to see. I want to show you what we created." And she takes me up into her bedroom, and the phone's moving, and you get kind of like nauseous watching she's moving with the phone, but so cute. And she turns the camera around so it's facing her room, and she's seeing it now with different eyes. And she says, "Oh, my room is a really big mess. We created a fort, but I can see that it's a big mess all around the fort." I said, "Oh, yeah. Who's going to clean that up?" She said, "Not me." We need to take responsibility for our own consciousness. And when we come into awareness of it, that's what we're responsible for. to clean up our own mess. Each of us is divine. We have that spark of divinity within us. And I love how Ellen says in the 5 principles, she always has this, yes, but, yes, we are all divine beings with that spark of God in us. But what about humans who don't behave divinely? Yeah, well, it happens, doesn't it? It's happened with us. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We're human. She talks about our brains, that our brains haven't yet caught up with modern times, that our prefrontal cortex was the last part of our brains to develop, and we're still often responding with survival instincts, with that fight or flight instinct from the older part of our brains. That front part of our brains, that prefrontal cortex, is the ability to think through something, to respond differently. And we all have this ability. And we have to wake ourselves up to that when we find ourselves in situations where we want to react. And we want to say someone else is wrong, or make someone else wrong because they don't agree with us. Jesus taught us to look at consciousness, not behavior. What is in a person's consciousness? Not the ego that is prone to overreact. Our egos are very young. Ellen Davenport says this: if everything is God, principle 1, then there can be no part of ourselves that is not divine, principle 2. Beware of any theory that paints human ego as bad and soul spirit as good. That is duality in a universe where, in fact, all is one. We came to earth as spiritual beings to have a human experience, and all of it is valuable. All of it is valuable. That's part of our wholeness, that we experience emotions that we deem negative, that we make mistakes, that we learn from our stressors. We basically have evolved, we evolved through crisis. And let that be okay. That we may be having a huge awakening right now on our planet. There are pictures of different protests and people holding signs, Black Lives Matter, throughout the whole world. I was quite moved yesterday when I saw them from many, many different countries, that this is awakening a lot of people. And it's about time that we come to know that the divine is within everyone, every single person. And Ellen says in her book, yes, but what about Hitler? What about Osama bin Laden? What about people like that? Right. Challenging to see that they also were inherently good. Maybe there's somebody that you see today who you think is not inherently good. It's still there. We were all created the same way, with the same love, with the one Spirit. We could think that, I believe that we come here to learn, to experience, to grow, to evolve our consciousness, that life doesn't end with the end of the body, the death of the body, that it continues. And in each incarnation, we are coming to experience something different. And so we choose. what things we need to learn and experience in this lifetime. It's a possibility. It's called soul contracts. And in Sue Morter, who wrote the Energy Codes, in her book, she has a few paragraphs she calls the bus stop conversation, where there are several souls waiting for the bus to come into this lifetime. And they're talking about what they're going to come into this lifetime to learn. And one of them says, I want to learn compassion. Another says, I want to learn self-love. And one soul speaks up and says, I want to learn forgiveness. And I'm not talking about a level 3 or a level 4 forgiveness. I'm talking about a level 10 forgiveness, like the ultimate level of forgiveness. And one of the souls says to that soul, how are you going to do that? How are you going to get a level 10 forgiveness lesson? And the soul said, I don't know, maybe someone will have too much to drink and get behind the wheel of a car. And maybe they'll hit me head on. And maybe my family's in the car, my whole family dies, and I'm left alive, but crippled. Something that was avoidable and nearly not forgivable, unforgivable. That would be a tough lesson to learn, that level of forgiveness. And he says, who wants to be the driver? Who wants to be the driver? Nobody's hand went up. That's a level of love that we can't even imagine. To give somebody a lesson in that level of forgiveness, and finally someone raised their hand and says, I'll be the driver. I want to learn self-forgiveness at a level 10. So it's not officially a unity teaching, but what if everyone that has come into this lifetime at this time is here to learn something, is here to experience something? Maybe some of us, it's a level 10 experience, and it's a really hard lesson. So what about those souls who say, I'll be the driver? Maybe they came into this lifetime to really open our eyes to compassion, to love, to end violence. We don't know, and we won't know in this human realm. But it's a possibility. It's a way of seeing with eyes of compassion for every soul. Not easy. What have we created in our consciousness that's preventing us from seeing the divine in every soul? From seeing the truth of this principle that each of us is God. That God is us, at the point of us. What needs to be cleaned up? Is it the view of yourself and your inherent worth? Is it the view of others and their inherent worth? What person in your life is not Christ in your view? Tough questions. We can only speak for ourselves and examine our own consciousness and our own hearts. We make mistakes, but we have the capacity, human beings, the first species that has the capacity to change, to make better decisions, to wake up, to transform. You know, as a Unity minister, we're told we're not here to make you comfortable. Oh, we're here to comfort the afflicted, but we're here to inflict the comfortable. And wake you up and inspire personal transformation and model that we too, I too, am waking up and learning and growing. We are one piece of the puzzle, and without us, the puzzle's incomplete. The world needs us, and it needs us to be our best selves. It needs us to respond out of love. It needs us to respond from that divine essence that we are. So during this time of heightened awareness of the virus of COVID-19 and the grief that it's causing and the change in our lives that it's causing and the long-term virus of racism, we can reflect on our own worth and the worth of all life. Ellen says this on page 54. The worst of our experiences can become the greatest blessings of our lives. Do you believe that? The darkest human behavior can move us to compassion and to the expression of our higher selves. I believe that love will win, that God wins. And then we will experience this great lesson of the Apostle Paul, Christ in you, your hope of glory. I want to move us now into a time of meditation. I'm going to use Ellen Davenport's book, Meditation on Principle 2. So I invite you to gently close your eyes and turn within. As I turn within, I retreat from outer awareness and enter my soul, the divine in me. It is here that I know my connection to spirit. Deep within, I find the peace that passes understanding. Deep within, I find the knowledge of all things and the awareness of absolute good. Deep within, I touch the gifts that are God. It is here that I receive wisdom and guidance, that I know truth and understanding, that I am strengthened and comforted. This is the divine essence that I am. The core of me is God. And from the God within me, I can do anything. I invite you to reflect on those words for a few moments.